What is going on, guys? It's Modded Dwarf here. Welcome back to another episode of the new PS4 Jailbreak tutorial series. So in this episode, I'm going to be showing you guys how to auto-load the PS4 Jailbreak for 9.00. This method also automates the USB as well, so you don't have to plug in the USB drive when you go to jailbreak your PS4 and then unplug it once you've loaded the jailbreak. This will do that completely for you. In fact, it will do the whole jailbreak for you pretty much. You just have to press one button. This is by far my favorite method of loading the PS4 jailbreak. This can also act as a completely offline solution as well. So if you don't want to be connected to the internet and you want to load the jailbreak completely offline, this will also do that for you as well. Plus, you can also choose to connect it to the internet if you want. So you can have it connected to the internet and auto-loading the jailbreak, or you can have it, be completely isolated offline, but still work and still auto-load the jailbreak. So it's pretty awesome. You can do either one. And it's a super simple setup as well. There is another method that's more complicated that uses like an ESP chip and you have to strip a USB cable and solder wires. This does not require any of that stuff. So we do still need a few kind of components in order to set this up. So one of the things that you are going to need to get for this is a Raspberry Pi. You need either a Raspberry Pi 0W or a Raspberry Pi 02W or a Raspberry Pi 4B. One of those Raspberry Pis will work. So I'm using a Raspberry Pi 02W. I just got it off Amazon. They're not too expensive, so I highly recommend getting one. You also need a micro SD card that's at least 500 megabytes or more. And you'll also need a micro USB to USB data cable and also some method of connecting the SD card to your computer. So that's all that's required for this. If you have that, it's a super simple setup. So all we need to do to get started is connect the SD card up to your computer using like an SD card adapter of some kind. So if we switch over to the computer and go to the Paul Jenkins GitHub, who is the one who kind of set this all up. So basically what you want to do is go to the releases section and download the corresponding zip file for your Raspberry Pi. So in my case, it's the Raspberry Pi 02W. So I'm going to download that zip file and then just go ahead and extract it to your desktop. So then we just need to mount this image file to our SD card, our micro SD card, using a program like Etcher, which I believe works on macOS and maybe Linux as well. But you can also use on Windows things like Rufus or Win32 Disk Imager. So we'll use Etcher. We'll select a flash file. And of course, it's the Raspberry Pi image that we want to select. Then we're going to select our target drive, which is going to be our micro SD card. So I'm going to select my micro SD card and then click flash, and that will flash the image to the micro SD card. Okay, and once it's done, it should say the flash is complete, and that's it. That is how easy it is to set this up, basically, because all you have to do now, just unplug the SD card and plug it into your Raspberry Pi. So connect that SD card up to your Raspberry Pi. So then we want to connect our micro USB cable to the Raspberry Pi. Now on the Raspberry Pi 2W, there's two USB ports on the Raspberry Pi. One of them is just for power, and it's marked on the circuit board. It says PWR_in, which is just for powering, so USB power. That's not the one we want to use. We want to use the one that's marked USB, because that one also accepts data. So it'll work with our USB data cable. So we're going to plug that one in to that slot, the one marked USB, and then plug the other end, of course, into your PS4. So if we switch over to the PS4, what we can do is head to settings, and then we can go to our network settings, set up an internet connection using Wi-Fi, and use a custom setup. And then you should find your Raspberry Pi network showing up right here, so Pi 0. And then we're going to set things up so that we have an automatic IP address. Do not specify DHCP. We're going to do a manual DNS setup. And for the primary DNS, we just want to enter 7.7.7.1 as our primary DNS and leave the secondary DNS blank. Then click next. And we'll do an automatic MTU and do not specify a proxy server. So that should be fine if we just check. We'll wait for it to grab an IP address. There we go, 7.7.7.23. So yeah, if you want to actually access the exploit site, you can either go into the internet browser and then just go to that DNS address that we entered. So 7.7.7.1. which will take us there. There we go. So this is the jailbreak site. I personally think it's much easier though if you just go into the settings and go to the user guide, because that will also redirect you straight to the page automatically, get to it much faster. So from here, I'll show you guys how this works. So firstly, we can run the Gold Hen payload. So if we run the Gold Hen payload, and this will try and jailbreak our PS4. So it says USB emulation happening. Do not close the dialog until the notification pops up and disappears. So I'm not plugging anything into my PS4, but as you can see, the notification pops up as if I've just plugged in my USB with the hacked image on it. And then I can click OK. And there we go, jailbreak done. And once that's loaded and I click OK again, it automatically unloads the USB as well. So it emulates the USB when you need to actually jailbreak the system. And then once it's jailbroken, it disables the emulation so that it's as if you've unplugged the USB. And that's it, it jailbroke automatically. I didn't have to touch my PS4, I didn't have to plug in a USB drive. It did it completely automatically, which is awesome. So if you run into an issue where it's not popping up with the notification saying unrecognized USB, then you might be using a USB cable that's only for power. So some of these micro USB cables are just for transmitting power to the device and not for transmitting data. So they may not support data. So if you have one of those, it will still power the Raspberry Pi and it will still have the Wi-Fi network that you can connect to. So you'll get up to this point of being able to load the exploit. But because it's not transmitting data, it will not do the USB emulation. So make sure you have a micro USB cable that does transmit data, and then it should work. It goes further, believe it or not, it goes further. So if I close out of here and go back on it, we'll go back on the site again, and I'll show you something that's completely wild that this does. It's kind of hilarious. So what you can do is you can go to the Raspberry Pi section up here, and then from here you can enable the auto jailbreak. And this is just ridiculous what this does here. So auto jailbreak set for 7.7.7.23. Make sure that settings, login automatically is set. So we'll click OK. And then what we'll do is we'll close out of here. And we'll just make sure that that's set. So login settings, login automatically is checked. And then what I'm going to do is restart my PS4. Okay, so I've rebooted the PS4 and watch what happens here. It detects a keyboard's been plugged in, even though there is no keyboard that's been plugged in. And if you just wait a few seconds, there we go. It's moving over to the settings menu, and now it's scrolling up to the user guide. I'm not touching anything. This is doing it completely automatically. And there we go. It's gone onto the site, and now it's loading the jailbreak. Again, I haven't touched anything. My controller isn't even connected to the PS4 right now. So we're just waiting to see if it loads the jailbreak. There we go. USB emulation, external keyboard disconnected. And now it's going to emulate the USB with the hacked image on it. There we go. USB storage device file system unsupported. So now I have to do the first part of manual labor, I guess, which is to press the X button. And there we go, jailbreak done. It has successfully loaded. Click OK. And now Gold Hen pops up in the top left. And that was it. I just pressed one button there. So that's crazy. It emulates a keyboard, scrolls over to the settings, activates the site, goes on the site, activates Gold Hen. And then once it's done that, it disconnects the emulated keyboard and then starts emulating the USB with the hacked image on it to actually jailbreak the system. And you just press one button and you're good to go. So that's just a completely one-click solution. You just load it up and you just click one button and it loads the jailbreak for you. So really, really awesome that it can do that. It's probably faster not to have the automatic jailbreak enabled in the settings, mainly because it's faster if you just do it yourself. If you just go to the user guide and run the Gold Hen payload, and it'll still emulate the USB for you. That'll be quicker because it takes a little while for it to emulate the keyboard and slowly scroll up to the settings menu. But the fact that it can do that automatically is just crazy to me. So another thing that you can do though is you can also get it to work online. So currently this is set up for offline use by default, the way that it's set up, the way that we set this up. So it's completely offline right now. So if you want an offline solution, you can just leave it the way it is. But if you also want to be able to connect to the internet, there is a way of setting it up so that it will work on the internet as well. and it'll still give you the same functionality. It'll just also allow you to connect to the internet, because right now, by default, as you can see, if I go to like, google.com, you can see I can't access any external sites. So if you do want to set it up so that it actually works on the internet as well, then we can go back to the site, back to the user guide, and then go to the Raspberry Pi option. And then we want to connect to our network. So connect to your home network. So this will give you a list of all the different Wi-Fi networks. So select your Wi-Fi network for your home network, and then enter the password for the Wi-Fi network in this box. And then once you've entered the password, click Wi-Fi enable. Okay, so once that's enabled, and we're now connected to our Wi-Fi network, we're then going to hit the button to reboot the Raspberry Pi. There we go, reboot command executed. And then we should be good. So now all we have to do is switch on over to our computer. Okay, so switching over to the computer, what we've just done is connected our Raspberry Pi to our home network. And what we need to do now is get the IP address of the Raspberry Pi on our home network. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. If your computer is connected to the same home network that your Raspberry Pi is, then you can just go to a web browser on your computer and type in http://pi0.local. If you enter that, it should take you to the Raspberry Pi, exploit page. And right here, it gives you the IP address of the Raspberry Pi on your home network. So in my case, it's 192.168.1.39. So that's the IP address that we want. You can also configure the settings for the Raspberry Pi right here on your computer if you don't want to do it through your PS4's web browser. So that's the easy way to get the IP address. The other way to get it is to log into your router's homepage, which you can do by opening up a command prompt window on your computer, typing in ipconfig, hitting enter, getting the adapter that's providing your computer with the internet connection, and then grabbing the default gateway address for that network adapter, in this case 192.168.1.1, and then pasting that into the URL bar on your web browser, and that will take you to the login page of your router, which you'll then have to log into, because most routers have a login page of some kind. And then once you log into your router's homepage, head to the section that shows all of the devices that are connected to your router, and then you'll find the Pi0 here somewhere, and as you can see, it gives you the IP address. The reason I've logged in here, though, is because it's recommended to set a static IP address on the Pi0 so that the IP address doesn't change, which I can do on my router by just going to the edit option next to the Pi0. And then from there, I can select this box to always assign this network device the same IPv4 address and click OK to apply the changes. So that will just set it up with a static IP address. Now, of course, everybody's router is going to be different to mine, so you'll just have to figure it out yourself on how to assign a static IP address if you have the option. So the reason why you want a static IP address is because if the IP address of the Raspberry Pi changes at some point, then you'll have to reset up the internet connection on your PS4 every time it changes, which is obviously quite inconvenient. So, of course, it's better to have a static IP address so it never changes. So on the PS4 now, all we have to do is connect to our home network on our PS4, just as we normally would. So we go into our network settings, set up an internet connection using Wi-Fi, using a custom setup. And then from here, we're going to select our router. So enter the password of your router and then do an automatic IP address. Do not specify DHCP. We're going to do a manual DNS. And then for the primary DNS, we're going to put in the IP address of our Raspberry Pi on our network. So 168.1.39 in my case. So we'll enter that IP address and then click next and then automatic MTU and do not specify a proxy server. So that's it. We should now have it set up so that we can access the internet while still being able to access the Raspberry Pi exploit host with the automatic USB emulation and everything. As you can see, we can still access it. If you get an error message while trying to go on here, by the way, after changing network settings and stuff, you can just fix it usually by clearing your website data. So you can just go to settings and clear your website data, and that should fix it if you're getting any kind of server error when you try and access the user guide page. We can still access this site. We can still load Gold Hen with the USB emulation. We can still have the auto jailbreak that automatically takes us to this page and runs the jailbreak for you. That will still work. However, we are connected to our home network, which means we can still access the internet. So if I want to go to Google, you can see it loads up here, no problem. So I'm still able to connect to my home network and access the internet if I want to. So I can still use, programs like the Homebrew store as well. Yeah, that's how you set it up both offline and online. That's kind of like the main stuff that you can do with it. So you can now use this online or offline, whichever one you prefer. There's also an option for USB load as well. This will actually mount the remaining storage on your SD card as a USB drive. So if you actually want to be able to, install package files from your SD card that's on the Raspberry Pi, you can actually do that by loading it as a USB. So for example, if I go back, right now the SD card is not mounted, it's not being used. So if I go into, debug settings, game, package installer, there's no packages found. But if I go back to the exploit site and load Raspberry Pi and then go and load USB, so do the USB load and click OK. So the remaining space on the SD card is now mounted as a USB drive. So now if I go to the same place, so debug settings, game, package installer, you can see there's now package files on here that I can install from the SD card. These are just two sample ones that are part of the image that we mounted to the SD card. So it adds these ones automatically, PS4 Explorer and Apollo Save Tool. So you can obviously add more if you just plug the SD card back into your computer. You can, put more packages on there to install them. And of course, you can also connect via FTP as well. So one final thing is, what about updating the payloads that are on here? So these payloads will not change over time unless a new image comes out that you can mount onto the SD card that has more payloads. But these payloads are accessible and changeable. So if you want to add any more payloads, you can add additional payloads to this site and it will automatically add them in here as a button that you can select, and you'll be able to load any additional payloads that you want to add. I mean, this has pretty much everything you could want anyway. It's got Gold Hen, it's got all the major payloads, it's got your web activator, Linux, mod menu payloads, WebRTE, PS4 debug, Orbis toolbox. All of that stuff is already built in right here. But if there's any other payloads, maybe some mod menu payloads or something that you want to add that it maybe doesn't have, then you can add those. You can do it in two ways. You can either plug the SD card back into your computer and then just add the bin files onto the SD card, or you can use FTP because it's actually got its own FTP server that it's running on that IP address, so 192.168.1.39. So if I switch back over to the computer for the last time here, we'll open up FileZilla. So for the host, it's going to be the IP address of our Raspberry Pi, which in this case is 1.39. Obviously, if you're still using the offline method for, using the Raspberry Pi offline, then you'll have to obviously connect your computer to the same network, the Raspberry Pi network, and then use it'll be something like 7.7.7.32 or something to connect to. But because we're connecting on our home network, it's 1.39, and then 2121 is the port number. There is a username and password. The username is user, and the password is FUSAND. And there we go, it connects, and you can see we've got the payloads right here. So if I wanted to add an additional payload, I don't actually have any other payloads, so we'll just use PS4 debug, even though this already has a PS4 debug payload. We'll just add this one called new PS4 debug. Then I can just drag it in here to FTP. So that should now work. Also, if you ever want to update a payload as well, like let's say a new version of Gold Hen comes out at some point, then you've got the Gold Hen payload right here. You can just replace the Gold Hen payload or add a new Gold Hen payload in here to update it. So you can also do that to update your payloads. So if we switch back over to the PS4, you can see nothing showing up. But if I refresh by going back to the user guide, we should now have that payload. So there it is right there. New PS4 debug is now showing up. Now I believe it requires the bin loader server in order to load these payloads. So you need to go into your Gold Hen settings and enable the bin loader server. And then from there, you will be able to load, additional payloads. So if we go ahead and try and run this now, new PS4 debug, there you go, payload sent successfully. And we should now have the PS4 debug payload running. There you go. So yeah, that works absolutely fine. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, if you want to replace the payloads without using FTP, you can just connect the SD card back up to your computer and then you'll have access to all the payloads and you can add new payloads in that way. or replace any payloads that way. And that's another way of doing it. So I would definitely highly recommend doing this. If you don't have a Raspberry Pi that you can use, then I highly recommend just getting one. You know, they're not too expensive. Obviously, you know, you can just go with plugging in the USB drive every single time. If you're okay with doing that, then just keep doing that. There's also, of course, you know, USB hubs that have the toggle switch on it. So if you're using that, where you just hit a button to load the USB and hit the button again to unload it, then it's probably not worth going out and getting one of these Raspberry Pis just to auto-load the exploit when you already have a simple way of doing it. But, you know, if you're using the USB drive method and you don't want to cause like wear and tear on the drive and on the ports, on the USB port from plugging it in and unplugging it all the time, then yeah, I would highly recommend this. This is just really awesome. I'm just having it plugged in all the time now. And yeah, definitely highly recommended. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll end the video here. Hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.